Some days mark a man so deeply that no matter how many years pass, the memory refuses to loosen its grip. For Isaac Evans, that day burned itself into his bones long before he understood what it would cost him, long before he knew it would also save him. It began under a merciless Texas sun, on a street where dreams were cheap and humiliation was free. The heat lay heavy over Willow Creek, pressing down like a hand on the back of Isaac's neck, turning each breath into work. Dust clung to his boots and sweat darkened the collar of his shirt as he stood outside the general store, broom in hand, pretending to sweep while his eyes were fixed on the sheriff's wall across the street. A fresh poster had been nailed there sometime that morning, its edges still curling slightly in the heat. The Willow Creek Stampede, the biggest horse race the county had ever known. Isaac had seen notices like it before, but this one felt different, brighter somehow, as if it were calling directly to him. Ever since he was a boy running barefoot along the dry creek bed, he had dreamed of riding in that race. He had imagined the sound of hooves pounding the dirt, the roar of the crowd, the moment when the announcer called his name. He knew better than to believe it could really happen. He owned no horse. He barely owned the clothes on his back. But still, when he looked at that poster, his heart leapt like it always did, wild and hopeful and foolish. Winning that race meant more than prize money. It meant being seen. It meant not being the poor boy from the collapsing shack by the creek, not being the invisible one people looked through instead of at. Just once he wanted the crowd to cheer for him. Just once he wanted to matter. The distant clatter of wheels snapped him out of his thoughts. A carriage rolled into town, its polished black sides gleaming like wet stone. Everyone knew that carriage. Conversations died mid-sentence. People stepped aside without thinking. Andrew Bailey had arrived. The richest man in Willow Creek and the cruelest, sat high behind two perfect bay horses whose coats shone like silk. The carriage slowed, then stopped, and Bailey climbed down, adjusting his expensive coat as if the heat did not touch him. His presence sucked the air from the street. His eyes moved lazily, then settled on Isaac with predatory focus. The smile that spread across his face was slow and sharp, the kind that promised pain. Bailey lived for moments like this, moments when he could remind someone exactly how small they were. "Evans," he called, his voice carrying easily, cutting through the stillness. Even the blacksmith froze, hammer hovering in midair. Isaac's hands tightened around the broom handle until his knuckles went white. He kept his eyes down, wishing he could disappear into the dust. But Bailey was already striding toward him. People gathered instinctively, forming a loose circle, drawn by the promise of spectacle. "I hear you're thinking about riding in the Stampede," Bailey said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "But a man can't race without a horse," Isaac swallowed. His voice, when it came, was quiet and thin. "It's just a dream, sir." Bailey laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the storefronts. "Dreams matter," he said smoothly, every word slick with mock kindness. "And I am a generous man." He snapped his fingers. One of his ranch hands stepped forward, leading an animal that drew a collective gasp from the crowd. Calling it a horse felt like a lie. It was skin and bone, scarred and limping, each step a visible struggle. Its ribs jutted out like broken fence posts beneath a dull, patchy coat. One eye was clouded and blind. Its breathing wheezed, labored and painful, and the faint stench of infection drifted on the air. Laughter rippled through the onlookers, sharp and unkind. "A gift," Bailey announced, pride dripping from his voice. "For the boy who wants to be a hero." The laughter hit Isaac like a physical blow. Heat rushed to his face, shame burning through him, leaving him exposed and raw. This wasn't generosity. It was cruelty dressed up as kindness. The ranch hand shoved the rope into Isaac's hand. The rough hemp scraped his palm. The horse stumbled and let out a low, broken sound that twisted something in Isaac's chest. He looked into the animal's one clear eye. Beneath the fear and pain, he saw it. A spark, a stubborn, flickering will that refused to die. It was the same look Isaac saw in the mirror every morning when he promised himself he would keep going. Slowly, he raised his head. For the first time in his life, he met Andrew Bailey's gaze. "Thank you, sir," Isaac said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "He's a fine animal. I'll call him Rusty." The crowd roared with laughter again, but Isaac barely heard it. He reached out and rested his hand gently on the horse's neck, leaning close to whisper, "Come on, boy, together." They walked away down the dusty road, Rusty limping beside him, the sound of mockery trailing after them like a curse. When Isaac reached the small shack he called home, his mother stepped outside. One look at the horse and her shoulders sagged. She closed her eyes, exhaustion and sorrow lining her face. "Oh, Isaac," she whispered, "what did he do to you this time?" Isaac stroked Rusty's neck, his voice soft but determined. "He just needs a chance." Even as he said it, the words sounded fragile. That night, as the sun sank and shadows stretched long across the yard, Isaac worked quietly, cleaning Rusty's wounds as best he could with what little he had. The horse stood trembling but did not pull away. As darkness settled, a figure approached from the road. George Wells stopped at the edge of the yard. He was one of the last real cowboys in Willow Creek, a man whose life had been written in dust and sweat and scars. He studied Rusty in silence, his weathered hands gentle as he checked legs, ribs, teeth. His frown deepened with every touch. Finally, he stepped back. "Where'd you get him?" George asked. "Andrew Bailey," Isaac replied. "He gave him to me. In front of everyone." George spat into the dirt. "That man's a fool," he muttered. "Because what he handed you isn't just some broken horse." Isaac frowned. "What do you mean?" George pointed to a faint, star-shaped scar hidden beneath the rough coat on Rusty's flank. "I know that mark," he said quietly. "This is Storm Dancer, fastest racer Willow Creek ever saw. He belonged to Bailey's wife." Isaac's breath caught. Storm Dancer was a legend, a champion whispered about in every stable in Texas, but "He's ruined," Isaac said. George shook his head. "Bailey hated that horse after she died. Tried to erase him, left him to rot. But a champion's blood doesn't vanish." Isaac looked at Rusty again, understanding dawning. The spark made sense now. "He can heal," George went on, voice grave. "But it'll take time and grit. The question is, do you have the heart to try?" Before Isaac could answer, a soft voice spoke from the shadows. "I do." They turned. Sarah Bailey stepped into the light, clutching a small bundle of medicine. Her hands trembled, tears shining in her eyes. "That horse was my mother's," she whispered. "And I won't let him die like this." In that moment, everything began to change. Isaac's life shifted the instant Sarah Bailey stepped fully into the light. The small bundle clutched against her chest like something fragile and sacred. She didn't look like the daughter of the most powerful man in Willow Creek. There was no pride in her posture, no sharpness in her eyes. She looked afraid, guilty, and resolute all at once, as if she had crossed an invisible line she could never step back over. Her voice trembled when she spoke, but she did not turn away. "My mother loved this horse," she said softly, each word heavy with memory. "More than anything. I couldn't stand by and do nothing, please. Let me help." Isaac stood frozen, unsure how to respond. He had barely exchanged polite nods with Sarah in town before. Now she was here in the dirt of his yard, risking her father's wrath for a broken horse and a poor boy everyone else laughed at. George Wells took the bundle from her hands and carefully unwrapped it. Inside were herbs, liniment, clean cloth, things Isaac had never been able to afford. George nodded once. "This will help," he said, "but medicine alone won't save him. Healing a horse like this takes work, every single day, no excuses." Isaac didn't hesitate. He looked at Rusty, standing thin and weary but still upright, and felt something settle inside him, solid and unmovable. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. And with that promise, the real battle began. Isaac started waking before the sun, when the air was still cool and smelled of damp earth. His muscles protested as he climbed out of bed, but he welcomed the ache. It meant he was alive. He mixed oats with warm water until they formed a soft mash. Careful, not to rush Rusty as the horse ate. At first, Rusty chewed slowly, flinching as if expecting pain even from food. Isaac stayed beside him, murmuring quietly, his hand resting on the horse's neck. "You're safe," he whispered again and again. "No one's going to hurt you." Mid-morning, George would arrive with his bucket of tools, his limp more pronounced in the early hours. He examined Rusty with practiced patience, pressing, testing, watching closely. "Bones straight," he said one morning, squinting at the leg. "It healed wrong because no one cared, but it can be fixed." They led Rusty to the shallow creek behind the shack, the water cool and clear. Isaac walked beside him, boots sinking into the mud as Rusty stepped gingerly into the stream. "Slow," George warned, "and steady. Don't let him favor it." The work was brutal. Isaac's legs burned, his back screamed, and some days it felt like the sun itself was trying to break him. But he kept going, telling Rusty stories as they walked. About the sky he dreamed of touching. About running free, about wind and open land. Sarah came after dark, always careful, always watching the road. She brought grain, bandages, and more medicine, her eyes full of worry. "I'm sorry," she told Isaac one night. "For my father. He wasn't always like this. When my mother died, something inside him broke." Isaac listened, unsure how to respond. He saw the pain in her, real and raw. "Storm Dancer made her smile," Sarah said quietly. "He danced when she rode him." Isaac glanced at Rusty, who lifted his head a little higher each day. "Maybe he remembers how," Isaac said. Days bled into weeks. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rusty began to change. His coat lost its dullness and started to catch the light. His ribs softened as weight returned. The tremor in his leg eased. Isaac brushed him every evening until Rusty leaned into the touch, breathing deep and slow. There were setbacks. One morning, Rusty's leg swelled badly after Isaac pushed him too hard in the creek. Guilt crushed Isaac. He sat in the dirt, head in his hands. "I ruined everything," he whispered. George examined the leg and shook his head. "You're fixing his body," he said, "but you're forgetting his spirit." So Isaac changed. He spent hours just sitting with Rusty, talking softly, reading aloud, letting silence settle between them. He rested his hand on Rusty's neck until the horse relaxed. Rusty's eyes changed. Fear gave way to something else. Trust. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, Rusty lifted his head over the stall door and let out a soft whicker of greeting. The sound shattered Isaac. He wrapped his arms around Rusty's neck, tears soaking into the horse's mane as Rusty leaned into him. But Willow Creek noticed everything. Laughter returned when Isaac walked Rusty through town. "There goes the fool," people muttered. Isaac kept walking. Rusty walked steady at his side, ignoring the noise. Then one evening, a rancher named Henderson rode up.
He
Studied Rusty carefully. "You really think you'll race him?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Isaac said. Henderson pulled out money more than Isaac had ever seen. "Take this," he said. "Drop out." Isaac's hands shook as he stared at it. He thought of his mother, the leaking roof, the hunger. Then he looked at Rusty. The horse met his gaze, calm and sure. Isaac pushed the money back. "We're not quitting." Henderson sighed and rode away. The next visitor wasn't so gentle. Andrew Bailey rode in on his massive black stallion, his presence darkening the yard. "You will not race that horse," he said coldly. He was a joke. "He was a gift," Isaac replied. Bailey leaned closer, his eyes burning. "If you race, you and your mother will lose." "Everything." Fear surged through Isaac. Then Rusty stepped forward, ears pinned. A low warning rumbling in his chest. Isaac felt courage rise. "He deserves to run," Isaac said. "And we will." Bailey rode away in fury, and the next morning, race day dawned heavy and hot over Willow Creek. Race day rose over Willow Creek like a challenge no one could escape. The sun had barely crested the horizon, yet the heat already clung to the air, thick and suffocating, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Wagons rattled in from every direction, kicking up clouds of dust that hung low over the dirt track. Horses stamped and snorted. Vendors shouted, children laughed, and somewhere beneath it all pulsed the restless hum of expectation. It felt as though the entire county had poured into Willow Creek, drawn by the promise of speed, spectacle, and pride. Isaac stood at the edge of the track beside Rusty, his hand resting on the horse's warm neck. The animal before him barely resembled the broken creature Bailey had mocked weeks earlier. Rusty's coat gleamed in the sun, copper and alive. His eyes were sharp, alert, carrying intelligence and memory. Strength had returned to his body, muscle filling out where bone had once pressed against skin. Yet Isaac could still feel a faint tremor beneath his hand. Not weakness, but history. Pain remembered. Fear remembered. Isaac leaned close, pressing his forehead gently against Rusty's. "We can do this," he whispered. "We have to." George Wells appeared beside him, his lined face calm, steady. He squeezed Isaac's shoulder. "Don't see the crowd," George murmured. "Don't see Bailey. It's just you and the horse. Trust what you built." A little distance away, half hidden behind a wagon, Sarah Bailey stood with her hands clasped tight at her mouth. Her face was pale, eyes shining with fear and hope tangled together. Isaac caught her gaze and gave a small nod. She returned it, swallowing hard. Everything they had done in secret had led to this moment. The starting line was chaos. 7 powerful horses lined up, muscles rippling beneath sleek coats, riders perched tall and confident in polished saddles. Isaac mounted Rusty without a saddle, gripping only a rope rein and faith. Fingers pointed. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "That poor boy brought the wreck again," someone shouted. "He won't last 10 seconds. Heat rushed to Isaac's face, but Rusty shifted beneath him, calm and grounded. One ear flicked back toward Isaac as if reminding him none of the noise mattered. Andrew Bailey stood on the judge's platform, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. His eyes locked onto Isaac, sharp and threatening. Isaac felt the weight of it, the promise that his defiance could cost him everything. His mother, their home. But there was no turning back. Not after the pain. Not after the healing. The starter raised his pistol. Time stretched thin. Isaac closed his eyes for a single heartbeat. "Stay with me," he whispered. The gun cracked. The gates flew open. The world exploded into motion. Hooves thundered, dirt flew, and the other horses surged forward in a wall of power. Rusty leapt too, but the noise struck him like lightning. His stride faltered. His front legs buckled. Isaac pitched forward, clinging desperately to Rusty's neck as they stumbled. They fell behind instantly, the distance between them and the pack growing with every heartbeat. Laughter roared from the stands. "Get off the track!" Rusty's breathing turned ragged. The old limp crept back into his stride. Panic rippled through his body. Isaac felt his chest tighten as fear clawed its way up his throat. They were losing. Badly. "Come on," Isaac begged, his voice cracking. "Please." But Rusty wasn't racing. He was reliving every blow, every neglected day, every cruel hand. By the backstretch, they were nearly 20 lengths behind. The crowd blurred into a distant roar. Isaac felt despair press down on him, heavy and suffocating. And then he stopped fighting. He leaned forward, wrapping his arms around Rusty's neck, letting go of force, of desperation. "I know you're scared," he whispered. "I know they hurt you. But he's not here. He can't touch you. Run for her. Run for the one who loved you. Run for who you are." Rusty's ears twitched. His stride evened. Something shifted, deep and electric. His head lifted. His breathing deepened. The limp vanished as if it had never existed. And then he ran. Not a struggle. Not a memory of speed. A true, powerful gallop that shook the ground. The laughter died. A stunned hush swept over the crowd before erupting into shocked shouts. "Look at that!" "He's flying." Rusty surged forward, devouring the distance. One horse fell behind, then another. Riders glanced back in disbelief as Rusty shot past them, mainstreaming, hooves pounding like thunder. George Wells gripped the fence, his breath caught in his chest. "That's him," he whispered. "That's Storm Dancer." By the final turn, only 2 horses remained ahead. Henderson's bay and Bailey's massive black stallion. The stallion's rider whipped it hard. Panic etched into his posture. Isaac leaned low, heart hammering. "Go," he urged. Rusty answered, muscles coiling and releasing with perfect rhythm. He overtook Henderson's horse, leaving only the black stallion between them and victory. The crowd screamed, a wall of sound crashing over the track. Bailey stared, his face drained of color. Side by side, Chestnut and Black thundered down the final stretch, the finish line rushing toward them. Every breath was held. Then Rusty found something more. One final surge born of love and memory and defiance. He stretched his neck forward. Isaac held on as Storm Dancer crossed the line by a single nose. Silence fell. Then the world erupted. Cheers tore through Willow Creek like a storm. Isaac slid from Rusty's back, collapsing against his neck, tears streaming freely. "You did it," he sobbed. George ran to them, laughing and crying all at once. Sarah pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around them, shaking with relief. Storm Dancer stood tall beneath the blazing Texas sun, proud and unbroken. Andrew Bailey stepped forward slowly, the crowd parting. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of armor. He reached out, his hand trembling as it touched Storm Dancer's muzzle. The horse did not flinch. "I'm sorry," Bailey said, his voice thick. "My grief made me cruel." He looked at Isaac, eyes wet. "You healed what I tried to destroy." He took a breath. "I want to make things right." Isaac looked to Sarah. She nodded through tears. He turned back, meeting Bailey's gaze, and nodded once. The noise of the crowd slowly faded into something distant and unreal as Isaac stood beside Storm Dancer, one hand still pressed to the horse's warm neck, feeling the powerful rise and fall of his breath. The world felt changed, as if the ground beneath Willow Creek had shifted forever. Dust clung to Isaac's clothes. Tears streaked his face and his legs trembled, but not from exhaustion. It was the aftershock of belief finally becoming truth. Stormdancer stood tall, ears forward, eyes bright and clear, no longer the ghost that had limped into Isaac's life, but the champion he had always been. People surged forward, shouting Isaac's name now, the same voices that had once laughed, their cheers crashing over him in waves. For a moment he barely recognized them. All he could see was the horse who had trusted him when no one else did. George Wells reached them first, his weathered face split by a smile that carried years of hard-earned wisdom and pride. He wrapped Isaac in a rough embrace, laughing through tears. "You did it, boy," he said hoarsely. "You listened. You didn't force him. You gave him back to himself." Sarah pushed through the crowd next, her composure gone, tears streaming freely as she pressed her hands to Stormdancer's neck, then to Isaac's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, the words trembling with emotion. "For saving him. For saving something my mother loved." Isaac could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. Stormdancer lowered his head slightly, accepting their touch calm and regal, as if he understood exactly what he had given them all. The crowd parted then, uneasy and expectant, as Andrew Bailey approached. Gone was the towering certainty, the cold dominance. He walked slowly as though each step carried weight. When he reached Stormdancer, he hesitated, then laid a shaking hand against the horse's muzzle. Stormdancer did not pull away. That simple act broke something in Bailey. His shoulders sagged. His breath hitched, and when he spoke, his voice was raw and stripped bare. "I let my grief turn into cruelty," he said quietly. "I tried to destroy what reminded me of what I lost." He looked at Isaac, eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did what I couldn't. You healed him. You reminded me of who he was, of who I was." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Bailey straightened, swallowing hard. "You and your mother will never want again," he said. "I want you to come live on my ranch, train my horses, help me make amends." Isaac felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He thought of his mother, of the shack by the creek, of nights filled with worry and hunger. He thought of Rusty, of Stormdancer, of everything they had endured together. He looked to Sarah, who nodded, hope and relief shining through her tears. Isaac turned back to Bailey and gave a single steady nod. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. And beginnings mattered. In the years that followed, the Bailey Ranch changed. It became known not for wealth or power, but for healing. Broken horses were brought from across the county and beyond. Given time, patience, and care, children learned to ride beneath wide Texas skies. Laughter replaced cruelty. They called it the Stormdancer Sanctuary, in honor of the horse who had reminded them all that strength was not about dominance but trust. Stormdancer lived out his days beneath the shade of a great willow tree, his coat always shining, his eyes always kind. When he finally passed, the entire town gathered, laying flowers beneath that tree, standing together in quiet gratitude. He had been more than a champion. He had been proof that even the most broken body, the most wounded heart, could rise again when given compassion, patience, and the courage to believe.